In 1992, construction workers in San Diego hit something buried 15 feet underground. They stopped the machines, called in the experts. What they pulled out of that dirt wasn't a pipe, wasn't a cable, wasn't anything the engineers had planned for.
It was a mastodon, broken apart in a very specific way. Its bones shattered. Its tusks spiraled into fragments, heavy stones placed nearby with impact marks on them that matched the bones exactly. The official explanation? Humans did this. Humans were here, in California, processing a mastodon carcass with stone tools 130,000 years ago.
That's not a typo, not a misprint. 130,000 years, which is roughly 115,000 years before humans were supposed to exist anywhere near this continent. The paper was published in Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals on Earth. And then almost nothing. The story disappeared. The debate was buried.
Here's what they found, and here's why it terrifies the people who've built their careers on the official timeline. The story of how humans came to the Americas is one of the most settled questions in mainstream archaeology, or at least it was. The accepted model is called the Clovis first theory. According to this framework, the first humans crossed into North America from Siberia through a land bridge, what we now call Beringia, somewhere between 13,000 and 15,000 years ago. They followed the coastline or moved through an ice-free corridor, spread rapidly across the continent, and became the ancestors of indigenous peoples in North and South America. It's a clean story, well supported by thousands of archaeological sites, backed by genetic data, by carbon dating, by decades of fieldwork. But the Clovis model has one vulnerability. It assumes it's the only story. And in 1992, 15 feet beneath a highway construction site in San Diego, a team of paleontologists found something that doesn't fit inside that story at all. The site was called Cerutti, named after Richard Cerutti, the paleontologist who first excavated it. And for 25 years, the bones and stones that came out of that ground sat in storage at the San Diego Natural History Museum, while the scientists who found them tried to figure out how to say what they believed without destroying their careers. But the official story had a problem. In 2017, a team of researchers published their analysis of the Cerutti Mastodon site in Nature. The lead author was Stephen Holen, a paleoanthropologist who had spent decades studying early human behavior. The paper was peer-reviewed. The methodology was rigorous, and the conclusion was, by any measure, extraordinary. The bones were 130,000 years old, not 13,000, not 30,000, 130,000. The dating came from uranium series radiometric analysis, one of the most reliable methods available for organic material of that age. 5 separate tests, all of them pointing to the same window, between 120,000 and 140,000 years ago. But the age wasn't the most disturbing part. What the researchers focused on was the pattern. Because when you find old bones, the question isn't just how old, it's what happened to them.
These bones weren't scattered randomly, the way they would be if a mastodon had simply died and decomposed. They were broken in a specific pattern, spiral fractures, the kind that only happen when bone is fresh, still containing marrow, still moist. Bone that has dried and fossilized breaks differently. Spiral fractures mean something or someone was breaking living bone.
And next to those bones, the team found 5 large stones, cobbles technically, the kind of heavy rounded rocks you'd use if you wanted to smash something open. Each one showed signs of impact on its surface, microfractures, flaking patterns consistent with repeated, controlled strikes. And the distribution of stone fragments around each cobble matched the distribution of bone fragments, strike for strike. This wasn't a natural event. Something used those rocks to break open those bones, probably to get to the marrow inside, one of the highest calorie food sources available to any hominin. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part is what was missing. There were no stone tools at Cerutti. No blades, no scrapers, no hand axes of the kind associated with the Clovis people or any other known early American culture. Just the cobbles, which means whoever was here either brought no tools or used tools made of material that didn't survive. Wood, bone, something perishable. That detail does something important to the narrative. It means we can't identify who was here. We can only prove that something was. And in 130,000 BCE, the list of candidates is short. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, were just barely emerging in Africa. They wouldn't reach Europe for another 80,000 years. The Neanderthals were active in Eurasia, but had never been documented anywhere near the Americas. The Denisovans, a mysterious archaic human species only identified in 2010, ranged across Asia, and some genetic evidence suggests they crossed into what would become the Pacific. One theory, quietly discussed in academic circles, is that a now unknown hominin species reached the Americas during an earlier interglacial period, a warm window between ice ages, when sea levels were lower and land connections existed that have since been swallowed by the ocean. But that wasn't the most disturbing theory. At minute 4, we have to talk about what the mainstream archaeology community did with this paper. Some rejected it outright, argued the bone fractures could have been caused by other large animals, perhaps other mastodons trampling the carcass, argued the impact marks on the stones could be natural, argued the uranium dating, while technically sound, might reflect contamination. These are valid scientific objections, the kind of objections that healthy skepticism demands. But here's what's harder to dismiss. The researchers anticipated every single one of those objections. They tested them. They ran the numbers. They showed in the paper why alternative explanations require a set of coincidences so improbable that statistically they barely register. The most pointed criticism was that the site had been disturbed, that the bones had been moved by water, that what looked like deliberate placement was actually sediment sorting. And the researchers had an answer for that too. The bones and the stones were too heavy, the sediment too compact. Nothing had moved. Everything was found exactly where it had come to rest. The scientific establishment didn't know what to do with Cerutti, and so quietly, it did what establishments sometimes do with things they don't know what to do with. It moved on. There are 3 ways to interpret what was found at Cerutti. Only one of them doesn't require rewriting everything. The first interpretation is that the team was wrong, that the fractures, the stone placement, the impact patterns, all of it has a non-human explanation we haven't found yet. This is the position of most mainstream archaeologists. It's the comfortable position. It preserves the Clovis model, preserves the timeline, preserves decades of consensus. The problem is that the researchers have never been shown to be wrong. Their methodology has been scrutinized for years. No one has published a convincing refutation in Nature or any equivalent journal. The objections exist, but they haven't been tested with the same rigor as the original paper. The second interpretation is that modern humans, Homo sapiens, reached the Americas far earlier than anyone thought, perhaps through a coastal migration by boat during a warm period when ice sheets retreated and ocean routes opened. This interpretation would require revising the timeline by a factor of 10. It would mean that early humans were seafaring 130,000 years ago, a capability we have no other evidence for anywhere on Earth at that point in time. But the third interpretation is the one that stays with you. What if it wasn't modern humans at all? What if an entirely different hominin, one we haven't found yet, one whose bones haven't survived, one whose tools were made of material that decomposed, made it to North America during an interglacial period, lived here and vanished? We know this has happened before. The Denisovans were unknown to science until 2010, identified from a single finger bone in a Siberian cave. Before that bone was found, we had no reason to believe they existed. We rewrote the human family tree based on the width of a child's finger. What if there's a Cerutti hominin, a species that crossed into the Americas during a warm window, survived here for some unknown period, and left no trace except one butchered mastodon and 5 heavy stones? If that's true, and the evidence at Cerutti doesn't rule it out, then the Americas have a history we haven't even begun to read. And somewhere beneath the sediment of this continent, there are more sites like Cerutti waiting. The Cerutti Mastodon site hasn't been excavated further. The location is known. The bones are in a museum in San Diego. The paper is still in Nature, still cited, still unanswered. What's remarkable isn't that the discovery was suppressed. It wasn't, not officially. It was published in one of the world's most respected journals and reported around the world. What's remarkable is how quickly the conversation ended, how fast the silence evidence came back. Because if Cerutti is what the evidence says it is, then the first chapter of American history isn't 15,000 years old.
It's 130,000. And whoever wrote that chapter, whoever sat beside a dead mastodon in what is now Southern California, in a world with no cities, no language we'd recognize, no memory of what came before, whoever they were, they left behind 5 stones and a set of broken bones. And we almost built a highway over them. The record was buried. We're digging it up.